What does it mean to capitalize something from entertainment to coffee to ride hailing to labor? Think about this example. I own a lemonade stand. I make $50 a week by selling this lemonade actively. However, if my friend wanted to buy 10% of this company, there's no formal value assigned to this company at the moment. There's no easy way of me being able to sell shares. There's no stock ticker. It's not listed on the New York Stock Exchange. There's no way of me being able to easily, formally give a value. However, I decide to make this process better and to capitalize the potential future earnings. I turn this into an incorporate company, Lemonade Tasty Incorporate. I have a local investor analyze the company. He evaluates that I'm going to assign a 5-year PE ratio to this market. You make $2,000 a year in revenue. That means that the business is going to be worth $10,000. That's the market cap. For 10%, I'm going to buy 10% for $1,000. You've now managed to capitalize the future earnings through being able to list this on a stock exchange and securitize this company and the future earnings that it's going to generate. For the first time in history, we've got the potential to be able to do this with labor. Now, let's think about a person's lifetime earnings. Even though it's absolutely colossal, it isn't currently securitized. It's not on the stock exchange. It's not something that you can capitalize at the moment. It's not for corporations a capital equity. At the moment, it is an expense. And so if you think about the fact that when you potentially build humanoid robots, this economic activity that comes from humans, which is the biggest input, and then it leads to the biggest output within every economic zone. When you actually have humanoids, you can start to capitalize this labor and add it as an equity on the balance sheet of a corporation. When you think about the global labor market, it's over 80 trillion a year in salaries, wages, benefits. And with this economic activity, it's like a ghost in the machine. You can't capitalize that economic activity until you have humanoids. And that's when you can start to add this to the balance sheet of the company, which will lead to earnings growing across every sector that include and absorb the humanoids that are being manufactured and built. In part one, we looked at the hip configurations of the different robot makers and the different combinations of flexion, rotation, and abduction, and how Tesla have gone with abduction, rotation, and flexion to be able to lift more load. In part two, we looked at the different actuators that you can go with, from rotary actuators, which is that motion to move the object, and then you've got linear actuators, which is that push and pull and horizontal and vertical action. And now in part three, we're going to look briefly at the economic activity and the economic impact of humanoid robots and how it can be positive, how it can be signal towards a future of potential prosperity. There is going to be real disruption in the future, and it's going to happen in the next 10 years. I think it's going to be sooner, but you can never be completely sure. And I just want to go through these charts. The impact of Optimus for Tesla in particular could be 245 times larger than the auto business. And JP Morgan just published 4 charts that have made me really reframe my view of the way that the future is going and the impact that humanoids will have. The contribution from the tech sector's capital spending is 35 to 45 of the overall US GDP. The Mag 7's capex in the billions is continuing to grow from Amazon all the way through to Microsoft. Information processing equipment and software is overtaking personal consumption expenditures. And as you can see, the hyperscaler R&D capex for all of these Mag 7 companies is scaling higher. They're investing in data centers, they're investing in compute, they're investing in inference, they're investing in software, they're investing in software engineers and large compensation packages to be able to incentivize them to continue to scale into this AI revolution. It's going to be over the next 5 to 10 years, something that could disrupt and also positively contribute to the growth of the GDP of all the major economic zones that embrace this as an opportunity rather than try and shun away from it or prevent it from happening. Jensen Huang says humanoid robots will become as common as cars and there will be significant breakthroughs in robotics in the next 2 to 3 years. Then Elon adds to this and says that they'll be 10x bigger than cars. That's 1.65 billion cars. In this video, I'm going to go through some very simple charts that come from one of my favorite analysts, Cern Basher. His work is absolutely brilliant. I genuinely learn so much from these people that I share in these videos, and I take their information, I think about it, I assess it, and then I apply it to my own understanding. And then I try and share the people I follow, because it's the people I follow that make this enjoyable for me, that make me curious. And that's all I get from this, is the curiosity of hopefully being able to encourage people who watch these videos to follow these incredible financial analysts, these visionaries, these pioneers that I use their information to try and help frame my understanding and make my own investment decisions. So if you like content on humanoids, if you're enjoying part 1, part 2, and you want to see part 3 and how it can economically impact potential companies, then like, comment, subscribe. Let's get straight into it. What's vital for these humanoid companies to be able to have success in this total addressable market is for their ability to have a brain, to have low latency from the software to the hardware, from being able to have dexterity in the hands, the most important part of the humanoid, for it to be able to do general purpose tasks, to be useful and productive. It needs to have the ability to use its hand. And therefore, the hand design is going to be extremely important. Being able to scale that extremely complex movement in the hand across hundreds of thousands of units is going to be another challenge on top of being able to design the hand to begin with. Then you've got the total manufacturing time to produce one robot, all the pieces and the assembly to get to mass production, and then the viability of that bill of materials and for it to be able to go into a production robot, not just a prototype. Therefore, the cost of this humanoid robot is going to be essential for it to be able to scale and be useful for companies to be able to absorb workers that they cannot replace. And so looking at the Optimus bill of materials and the cost of the goods is very useful and indicative of where the market will need to go going into the next few years as they start to commercially sell these robots. So comparing an Optimus to a Model 3, you've got total weight being 120 pounds to 4,000 pounds. The battery pack is 30 pounds. The Model 3 has a 1,100 pound battery pack. The weight without the battery pack is 90 pounds, and then the weight for the Model 3 without a battery pack is 2,900 pounds. The reason why that's important is because the energy in tons to create one Model 3 is much larger than the energy required to make an Optimus robot. So once you have the design lock, the bill of equipment, the materials, the assembly line, you're going to be able to churn out these humanoids a lot faster without as much capacity as it would take to make the same amount of Model 3s. And not going through all of the costs, you can stop the video here and you can have a look for yourself, but CERN's able to use Scott Walker's analysis, who's an extremely good robot expert, and come to the actual total amount being $8,445. Elon has just added $3,000 to $4,000 for the AI4 computer chip. So this is going to come to a total of about 11 to 12,000 US dollars to make. And then if you sell these for 25,000, you're going to be making extremely high margin on these eventually when they're in the millions of units. Comparing that to a Model 3, it costs 30,000 to make a Model 3. And so the margin opportunity when you scale out these two products is absolutely essential to the cash flows that are going to come in Tesla's humanoid opportunity in the future. Now, let's look at an example where this robot is absorbed by a company like Walmart. And these two lines are extremely profound and very insightful. The blue line shows the bot workforce allocation, so the amount of robots that need to be absorbed by that company. If you have 35% of that new workforce absorbed by humanoids, just doing simple pick and place tasks, that will lead to a net income impact of 100%. So companies only need to replace 35% of their workers, which they are struggling to do anyway in these particular types of jobs, in these manual labor type jobs. They will make 100% more revenue and earnings. And this is going to mean that you're capitalizing, like I said in that example, you're capitalizing human labor and you're adding it to the actual capital equity of the company rather than it being an expense. Now, looking more detailed into these numbers, and CERN just puts them so beautifully, you've got Walmart, Target, and Kroger. So for Walmart, you've got 2.3 million employees. You've got an estimated labor cost of $100 billion. If you were to replace 35% of this workforce with humanoid robots, you would only need 230,000 because it would be, for every one human, it would be 3.5 humanoids, essentially, because you can have humanoids work for longer and capitalize even more of the day because they can do 3 to 4 shifts. they can work for 20 hours and have 4 hours of charging, which means that they're going to be even more productive. That will lead to 23 billion in annual savings, which will be absolutely massive for a company. And that will probably be around 100 to even more than 100% for a lot of companies who just absorb some of the workers that they cannot replace with humanoids. In the aging population that we're a part of, I'll go into some of the data on that at the end, but it is quite clear and it's quite stark that there is going to be an essential need for humanoids to just fill and absorb some of those roles that aren't being taken. If we go through those numbers for Target, again, 35% would be 45,000 humanoids. That would be $4.5 billion of savings. And then for Kroger, you would need 25,000 because it's a lot smaller, and that would be $2.5 billion of savings. Each of these gets you to 100% growth in terms of earnings, and it also just does not require replacing every single worker. It just requires replacing the workers that you cannot find, that these companies are struggling to replace at the moment. Well, aren't these humanoids going to require a lot of energy in order to power throughout the day? And that is correct. And data centers and everything that's going to be a part of the infrastructure for the AI industry that's developing is going to require a lot of power. And to generate power, you need to think about renewable energies. And this is going to lead on to Joe Badgie and his work. And he's really thought about the opportunity with Tesla, the megapacks, and the fact that the energy stabilization that comes from having these megapacks, being able to distribute energy from solar within the next few hours after the most peak periods of time for electricity use is going to be extremely essential. Jesse Pelton puts it perfectly when he talks about the current state of compute. There are 50 gigawatts of data centers globally. There are 160 gigawatts of humans in compute comparison. 20 watts is a brain. That's 8 billion humans. Humans are extremely expensive to fuel. You can feed silicon electricity. We should have way more silicon, which is what's used for the humanoid robots and for the compute. Global primary energy is 18 terawatts. However, the sunlight on Earth is 173,000 terawatts. And so we're worried about 0.05 terawatts of data centers. Basically, the growth will accelerate, demand will accelerate, and the sunlight can power all of this without really having to worry about consumption of energy and the impact that it will have on the Earth. The actual reality here and the signal here is that we can scale compute with silicon, which is required, and it's the most essential component for compute, for the chips, for the computers that are going to be used in the AI brains, in the FSD, and the humanoids. And that's going to be powered by electricity, and that electricity can be powered by solar. And then this brings me on to Joe Badgie's research, which looks at basically the peak period between 4 to 6 hours is where the most amount of energy is being used, above 50%, above average. And what the ability of a megapack will create. So what are megapacks? They are basically small storage devices that can be attached to energy generating facilities. And then they can allow you to store energy that comes from solar, and it can be distributed at a slower pace. So it can be used outside of those peak periods. So it's an extremely important way to stabilize the electricity on the grid. There are 2 facilities that currently make them. Lathrop make 10,000 in capacity and Shanghai make 10,000. That's a total of 20,000. The number of megapacks required to make 1 gigawatt is 526, which is 1,000 megawatts. And that will allow for 2 to 7 hours of distribution outside of those peak hours where there isn't the reliability of the energy from the sun and you can't extract and harness the solar. You have these megapacks outside of that being able to power this silicon, these AI computers, and all of the electricity that's going to be required for data centers and for humanoid robots. And so that's just a really important part of all of this. The infrastructure is being built, and Tesla, again, are a company that are at the forefront of being able to think about all of the different essential pieces of equipment and components that are going to be required, from humanoids to the silicon required and to being able to stabilize the energy required for the data centers, for the humanoids to be able to be as productive and to be able to capitalize that $80 trillion of labor throughout the year. I want to finish off with how could all of this be relevant and focus on the impact of humanoids when it comes to thinking about the requirement for retirees. People who retire are going to require support, and they're going to need the infrastructure to be able to provide support. And therefore, at the moment, we have this imbalance between an increasing number of retirees and a shortage of young workers, productive workers that are going to be entering into the workforce to provide for those retirees. So the importance of being able to stabilize this curve is going to grow ever more essential. In 1937, the life expectancy of an adult was 61 years old. And there's 128 million people in this population in the United States, as an example. And 54,000 of them were supported by the government through Social Security. That's 0.004%. That means there's 40 workers to every one retiree. With every 40 people, you have that one person supported. And today we have 74 million who require Social Security. Out of 340 million, that's 21% of the US population, which means that every one worker will have to try and support two people into retirement. That's an extremely unsustainable future, and therefore humanoids are really going to play a part in being able to support and grow GDP to be able to support the aging population around the world in every economic zone. And therefore, it's essential that we have these productive units that can grow capital, grow earnings, grow revenues in every economic zone, but also be productive general purpose humanoid units that can be helpful within the domestic home. Another layer to this is record number of European companies' bond yields fall below the French sovereign debt, which means that companies have a more desirable bond than the country. And therefore, people are trusting companies over the country. And this is in France, in Italy, in the UK, because that bond yield for those companies is a lot lower, which means that people trust that return more than they trust the actual country. Another element to this is French pensioners now have higher incomes than the working age adults. Again, this is just showing this imbalance between a younger workforce and an increasing growing population of retirees into the future. And we have to be able to stabilize that curve and provide and be productive and create enterprise into the future that can support more and more people. These next two charts are really important to me because they show that the age expectancy is increasing as people get healthier, they live for longer, and you've got people over 65 and 85. That group of people is growing, which is extremely positive. Brings me a lot of joy to know that people live longer. But as they live longer, there's going to be a requirement to be able to support yourself for longer and have a longer ability to provide for yourself. And that's where, again, humanoids can really help bring levity to this growing difficulty for a lot of people who may retire and have a lot longer to be able to survive and have a lifestyle. And this chart looks at the outgoings surpassing the income. And so, again, we're going to need to somehow raise GDP, and humanoids and productive units and being able to capitalize labor is going to be a way to grow outside of that deficit and provide into the future. Humanoid robots are a 1,000 trillion market. And Elon says no real limit because an economy is productivity per capita times capita. Intelligent humanoid robots uncork capita. The more humanoids, the more you can capitalize labor, the more you can uncork and raise the ceiling of opportunity. Final thoughts. In essence, the astronomical valuation of Tesla is not rooted in the products it sells, but in the economic category it is unlocking. By creating the means to capitalize the global labor market, Tesla is positioning itself not as a participant in the current economy, but as the architect of the next one. This represents a fundamental paradigm shift, moving from a world of human labor scarcity to one of autonomous abundance. By the way, the value of robotaxi is just another form of the same thing, effectively capitalizing the value of unpaid driving time. You have all of these agentic, autonomous hardware units that are being built. And this company, Tesla, are the ones that are leading the way and pioneering forward. And so in part 3 of this series, it's allowed me to understand the hip configurations, the movement, the motion, the scalability, the actuators, the most important components, and the impact that it can have on the economy and on the earnings of companies. and the essential need for humanoids to support an aging population and to help replace the lack of younger productive units that are being born. And so for me, it just kind of sparks my curiosity, and it makes me more confident and more comfortable and more reassured with where the future's going. So I hope that you got some value from these videos. Watch the first two, which is just basically looking at the mechanics, and then this will make more sense. So see you in the next one. Thank you very much.